My grandfather raised his glass across a table glowing with chandeliers and cinnamon candles and said, "Glad you're enjoying the college fund we set up for you." I froze. My fork hovered midair. "What fund?" I asked, and the laughter around us died like someone had cut the power. My dad coughed into his napkin, wine spilling down his wrist. My mom's face drained to white. Then my little cousin whispered, "Wait, you didn't know." And that was Thanksgiving, the night one careless toast set fire to everything I thought was family. By the time the dishes were cleared, I'd stopped being their quiet daughter and started becoming something they'd never see coming. Thanksgiving was supposed to feel like homecoming, but walking into my grandfather's mansion felt more like entering a museum where I didn't belong. The driveway glowed under gold lights, and through the tall windows I could already see the family gathered around the grand table. Everyone looked polished silk cufflinks and smiles rehearsed for photos. I smoothed down the wrinkles in my thrifted dress and told myself to breathe. For once, I just wanted to survive the night without feeling like an outsider in my own bloodline. Inside, warmth and cinnamon wrapped the air. Grandma Margaret hurried from the kitchen with a tray of sweet rolls, still calling me darling, like she had when I was 10. Her voice was the only thing that still sounded real in that house. Grandpa Daniel sat at the head of the table, silver hair sharp under the chandelier, a man whose confidence could fill the room even in silence. When he saw me, his eyes softened. "There's my Hazel," he said, and for a heartbeat the knot in my chest loosened. My parents arrived moments later, loud and polished, laughing too hard at Uncle Richard's jokes. My father clapped me on the shoulder as if we were strangers who shared a surname. My mother kissed the air near my cheek and whispered, "Try to look relaxed, sweetie." I nodded, pretending not to hear the tremor in her voice. "Ethan." My brother didn't even glance up from his phone. It had been months since we'd said more than a sentence to each other. As the dinner began, the table shimmered with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes drowned in butter, and crystal glasses filled with wine I couldn't pronounce. I sat between Grandma and Aunt Julie, who immediately started her ritual interrogation schoolwork, dating life, all delivered with that syrupy sweetness that felt more like a test than interest. I smiled through every question, giving short, tidy answers, while my fingers traced the edge of my plate. Grandpa's laughter echoed from the far end, deep and steady, the sound of someone proud of the family he'd built. For a moment, I almost believed in that illusion. I wanted to. Because it was easier to pretend that everything was fine, that my parents weren't the same people who ignored my calls when rent was due, that they hadn't stopped asking about my classes, that I wasn't sitting there in a dress bought with my last paycheck. The candles flickered. Someone poured more wine. I looked around that perfect table and thought, maybe this year will be different. Maybe warmth can last longer than one night. But somewhere deep down, a quiet voice whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. Peace in this family always came before the storm. The moment Grandpa's glass hit the table, the whole room seemed to shrink. His voice had carried warmth a second ago, but the words still hung there like smoke. "Glad you're enjoying the college fund we set up for you." For a heartbeat, no one reacted. I blinked. "What fund?" I asked. The words quiet sharp enough to slice the air. It was like I'd triggered a chain reaction. Dad's chair scraped. He coughed hard, hand over his mouth, wine spilling down his cuff. Mom's fork dropped, her face gone pale. Even the chandelier light seemed colder. Mason, my 8-year-old cousin, looked up from his mashed potatoes, eyes big and honest. "Wait, you didn't know," he whispered. The table went silent except for the faint hum of the heat vents. Grandpa frowned. "The fund," he repeated slowly, as if explaining something simple to a child. "The one we started when you were born. We've been adding to it every year. Your parents have been managing it." I turned to my dad. His face was red, his jaw tight. Mom was staring at her plate, the silver of her ring trembling against the china. "You've been managing it," I said, each word heavier than the last. "Because I've been living off $5 coffee shifts and microwave noodles, and somehow that fund never found its way to me." Mom's voice came out thin. "Hazel, please. We used it for emergencies, for the house, for Ethan's braces. You were doing fine." "Fine," I laughed, the sound brittle. "Do you even know what fine looked like for me? Working nights while studying, skipping meals to pay rent, you called that fine. Grandpa's expression hardened, all the pride in his posture draining away. That money wasn't yours to use, he said, eyes on my parents. We made it clear it was for Hazel, for her future. Dad's tone shifted from guilt to defense. Maybe if you hadn't insisted on putting it in our names, enough, Grandpa snapped. His voice cut through the air like glass shattering. We trusted you. The silence that followed was unbearable. My grandmother's eyes glistened. Aunt Julie leaned forward, sensing gossip disguised as concern. My cousins stared at their plates. And me, I couldn't breathe. I sat there, surrounded by gold silverware and fine china, realizing the family that preached loyalty had stolen my future, one emergency at a time. I pushed my chair back. The scrape echoed across the polished floor. You let me drown, I said softly, and you watched. Mom reached out, but I pulled my hand away. Don't, I said, my voice low, steady. You don't get to fix this with tears. I stood up. The chandelier flickered overhead, throwing shards of light across their faces. Nobody followed me as I walked out. In the hallway, my reflection flashed in a gold-framed mirror, small, furious, unrecognizable. And somewhere deep inside beneath the shaking, a new thought formed. If they could lie that easily, they had no idea what truth could do. The air outside was colder than I remembered. My breath came out in clouds sharp against the night. The mansion behind me glowed warm and gold, but every window felt like an eye watching me leave. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. By the time I reached my apartment, my dress still smelled like their flowers, roses, and smoke. I tore it off, dropped it onto the floor, and sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. I kept hearing Grandpa's voice, clear as glass. The fund we set up for you. And Dad's, we meant to replace it. Every word replayed like a lie I'd been trained to accept. Around me, everything looked smaller than it had that morning. The peeling paint, the flickering light, the stack of bills on my desk, half paid, some unopened. The numbers blurred as I stared at them, rent, tuition, groceries, interest. Every sacrifice I'd made, every hour I'd spent believing struggle was noble, it had all been unnecessary. They'd let me live like this while they built their comfort on money meant for me. I pulled out my laptop and searched the bank Grandpa had mentioned in passing, one I'd never used. After an hour of dead ends and shaky phone calls, I finally got someone to talk to me. Do you have an account under my name, Hazel Anderson? The hold music played for too long. Then a voice returned, careful and hesitant. Yes, but the balance is 0. 0. The word felt almost gentle, like it was trying not to hurt me. But it did. The representative hesitated. Withdrawals were made regularly, signed by John and Linda Anderson. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark. No music, no crying, just silence pressing against the walls. The next morning, I walked into the campus legal aid office, clutching a folder of every piece of paper I could find. Loan statements, pay stubs, scholarship letters. The woman behind the desk listened quietly, flipping through the pages. When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. Hazel, if that fund was set up for your education and they used it for themselves, that's misappropriation. The word hung heavy between us, ugly legal final. Is that a crime, I asked? It can be, she said gently. If you want to pursue it, start collecting proof. That night, I did exactly that. I built a stack of evidence taller than my textbooks, bills, records, every trace of the life I'd survived without their help. I laid them out across my floor, piece by piece, until the carpet disappeared under paper. Every document was a scar I could finally see. When I was done, I stood there in the stillness, surrounded by the life they'd stolen, and realized I wasn't powerless anymore. They'd taught me silence was strength, but now I knew the truth. Strength was speaking first and letting the truth finish the rest. Christmas came fast that year, wrapped in fake cheer and lights that didn't warm a thing. The same house that had glittered at Thanksgiving now looked colder, like even the gold in the chandeliers couldn't hide the cracks. I almost didn't go, but Grandpa had called me himself. You should be here, Hazel, he'd said. You deserve to be. So I went, not as the quiet daughter anymore, but as the woman who knew the truth. The front door opened to the same smell of cinnamon and money. My parents were already there, dressed to match the room, perfectly pressed, perfectly false. Mom's voice rose when she saw me. "Hazel, you came," she said, like I'd done something generous. Dad gave a stiff nod, his jaw tight. He hadn't looked me in the eye since Thanksgiving. Ethan mumbled a half-hearted hey from the couch. I hung my coat and glanced toward the dining room. The table was set again, same china, same silverware, same seats. Only this time the warmth was gone. Grandma stood by the kitchen doorway, hands fidgeting with her apron. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, unreadable. Dinner started the way all Anderson dinners did, small talk with edges. Weather, work prices, and a Julie dropped passive-aggressive comments like, "Ornaments, Hazel, still in that little apartment, dear," and Uncle Richard pretended not to hear. I let them talk. I waited. Halfway through the meal, Dad stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. I just want to say he began rehearsed smile on his face that family means everything. We've been through a lot this year, but what matters is sticking together. I felt the spark of bitter laughter rise in my throat, but I didn't let it out. Instead, I reached down, lifted the folder from beside my chair, and placed it gently on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood cut through the chatter. Since Thanksgiving, I said, voice steady, I've been asking one question. What fund? The room froze. Grandpa looked up sharply. Mom's hand stopped halfway to her glass. I have the answer now. I continued, sliding the folder toward the center. Every withdrawal, every date, every signature. You didn't use the fund for me. You used it for yourselves. For the roof, the car, Ethan's braces, groceries, vacations, all of it. Mom's lips trembled. Hazel, please not tonight, I cut her off. Not tonight. I spent years patching my shoes with duct tape while you sat on money meant for me. I worked double shifts, starved through finals, while you told everyone I was doing fine. Dad's face darkened. We did what we had to do for the family. I met his eyes. No, you did what was easiest for you. I was the family. A long, brittle silence followed. The clock ticked once, twice. Grandma whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Then Grandpa reached for the folder. He opened it slowly, scanning the first few pages. Bank records, payment slips, my tuition notices. His hands trembled. When he looked up, his voice was quiet but razor sharp. "You stole from your own daughter," he said to my parents. "From your own blood." Mom's tears came fast, messy. "We didn't mean to hurt her." "You drained her future," Grandpa snapped, "and lied to me about it for years." Dad tried to speak, but the anger in Grandpa's eyes stopped him cold. "I trusted you, John. I trusted you with her life." For a moment, no one breathed. Then I spoke soft but clear. "I've already filed a report. The bank's investigation is open. They'll be in touch about repayment and legal steps." The room broke open. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "You're suing your own parents." "No," I said. "I'm holding thieves accountable." "There's a difference." Mom sobbed harder. "Hazel, you can't do this to us." I looked at her and felt nothing but distance. "You did this to yourselves. You just didn't expect me to notice." Aunt Julie leaned forward, whispering, "Oh, dear Lord," like she was watching a movie she couldn't turn off. Ethan sat frozen guilt flickering across his face. Grandpa stood up slowly, his chair scraping the floor. He walked around the table and stopped beside me. For a second, I thought he might be angry that I'd made a scene. Instead, he put a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone," he said quietly. I nodded once, throat tight. "I know." Dad's eyes darted between us, disbelief creeping in. "You're taking her side," he asked Grandpa. "There's only one side here," Grandpa said. "The truth." No one spoke after that. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock and the faint hiss of the fireplace. I gathered the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood. My legs were steady this time. As I reached the doorway, Mom called out through her tears, "Please, Hazel, we can fix this." I turned back just once. You can't fix something you never intended to keep whole. Outside snow was falling, thick, quiet, relentless. The air bit at my face, but I didn't mind. Each step away from that house felt lighter. In the driveway, my car was dusted with white. I brushed it off with my sleeve, opened the door, and looked back one last time. The mansion glowed behind me, beautiful and broken. Inside, they'd be sitting in that silence, facing what they'd done. and for the first time, I didn't feel small. As I drove away, the snow caught in the headlights, swirling like ash. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror, and I whispered to no one. Everything fell apart again, but this time it wasn't me who broke. The letter from the bank arrived a week later, thick envelope official seal. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The investigation was underway. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every transaction was under review. If fraud was proven, the bank said my parents would be held financially responsible. I didn't smile, didn't cheer. Justice rarely feels like joy. It feels like breathing again after years underwater. A few days later, Grandpa called. He didn't ask about the case. He just said, "There's something waiting for you at the bank." When I arrived, the teller handed me a cashier's check and a note in his handwriting. "For your start, not your survival. $20,000, enough to lift the weight without erasing the memory of how it got there." I paid down my student loans that afternoon. Watching the number shrink on the screen didn't feel like victory. It felt like reclaiming time that had been stolen. I opened a new account under my name only. No shared signatures, no loopholes, just mine. Spring came early that year. I graduated under a pale sky, wearing a borrowed cap and a smile that finally felt earned. In the crowd, I saw Grandpa and Grandma clapping for me. My parents weren't there. I told myself I didn't care, and for once it was true. When I walked across that stage, I wasn't carrying their shame anymore. Only my own name and the quiet kind of peace that comes after the storm. They say family is forever, but forever doesn't mean blind loyalty. Sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. I used to think strength was staying silent, keeping the peace no matter the cost. But now I know silence only protects the ones who hurt you. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the ones who don't steal your future. If you've ever had to choose truth over family, tell me where you're listening from so I know I'm not alone. And hit subscribe because the next story might remind you just how strong you already are.